Tears streamed down Kyle Richards' face as she sat beside her daughter, holding back sobs while struggling to stay composed. To her left, Mauricio Umansky had his eyes tightly shut, his face contorted with visible heartbreak. Their daughter, caught between the two, broke down entirely. The three of them, usually polished and picture-perfect in the public eye, were unraveling in private pain that no camera could sugarcoat. The pain was real. The silence in the room was deafening, but their tears said everything they couldn't. The emotional breakdown came after months of turmoil that had slowly begun to fracture the once tightly knit family unit. For years, fans watched Kyle and Mauricio on the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, a couple that seemed to balance the pressures of reality TV, family, and success with impressive grace. But the image they projected wasn't immune to cracks, especially when the cameras stopped rolling and real life set in. The tension had started subtly. Mauricio was working around the clock, launching his high-end real estate ventures while trying to stay present for his daughters. Kyle was juggling her own career, personal growth, and the relentless scrutiny of life in the spotlight. As their schedules filled up and communication waned, the emotional distance grew. For a family built on visibility, they were suddenly struggling with the invisible. The night before this breakdown, they had attempted another family dinner. It was supposed to be a reset, no phones, no distractions, just the three of them reconnecting over a meal. But it ended in silence. Their daughter had asked a simple question, "Are you guys okay?" And it hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Neither Kyle nor Mauricio had an answer. The silence that followed that question haunted them all the next day. Back home, Kyle went to her daughter's room and sat quietly beside her. Mauricio followed minutes later. The daughter began to cry and Kyle joined her, not knowing what else to do. Mauricio sat across from them, overwhelmed by the emotional wreckage that had accumulated over months of avoidance, resentment, and silent pain. They weren't crying about one fight, one moment, or one misunderstanding. They were grieving something deeper, the fading of something they had once believed to be unbreakable. It was their daughter who finally said what none of them could. "I miss the way we used to be." Kyle looked at her and whispered, "Me too." Those three words were like a detonator. Mauricio, who had remained composed through so much in his career and public life, broke. His tears fell with a quiet force that made everything feel terrifyingly real. It wasn't just about a marriage in crisis. It was about a family realizing they were drifting apart and unsure of how to find their way back to each other. For Kyle, this moment had been building for years. She had grown up in a family full of complicated relationships and unresolved trauma. Her biggest goal in life was to give her daughters the stability and unity she always longed for. And for a while, she believed she had done it. But this moment, her daughter crying between two parents who loved her but didn't know how to love each other anymore, shattered that belief. Mauricio's guilt ran deep. He wasn't just feeling the pain of a strained marriage, he was questioning his role as a father. He had always believed that success was his way of providing, his way of showing love. But now, staring at his crying daughter, he realized that presence mattered more than provision. The cost of his ambitions suddenly felt too high. They talked for hours that night, not about solutions but about feelings, about fear, disappointment, and regret. It was the first time in a long time that they all allowed themselves to be brutally honest. Kyle admitted to feeling lonely in her own marriage. Mauricio confessed that he often didn't know how to be emotionally available. Their daughter, young but emotionally intelligent, said, "I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be here." That moment became a turning point, not a solution, but a reckoning. In the weeks that followed, they made changes. Kyle started therapy on her own and invited Mauricio to attend couple sessions. He agreed, reluctantly at first, then with increasing openness. They kept their daughter in the loop, not because they wanted to burden her, but because they wanted to show her that healing was possible, even if it was messy. They pulled back from public appearances. Kyle skipped press events. Mauricio declined a few major interviews. Fans speculated, but the family didn't offer explanations. They weren't ready to tell their story because they were still living it. Instead, they focused inward: morning walks, unplugged dinners, group therapy sessions. There were still fights, still awkward silences, but there was also a new kind of honesty that began to form a bridge between them. Kyle began journaling again. She wrote down memories from when they were happiest: family vacations, inside jokes, lazy Sundays. She shared some of these entries with Mauricio, who responded with his own memories. It became their silent love language, a way of reconnecting without the pressure of fixing everything overnight. Their daughter noticed the change. She still had moments of fear, of wondering if things would fall apart again, but she also felt hope. Her parents weren't pretending anymore. They were trying genuinely, painfully, and consistently. And that, she realized, was more meaningful than any perfect picture or polished public statement. Mauricio took a break from work and planned a family retreat. Just the three of them: no phones, no cameras, no expectations. They rented a small cabin in the woods, cooked together, and talked about everything and nothing. It wasn't a magical fix, but it reminded them of what they loved about each other: their humor, their warmth, their shared history. Back home, Kyle started filming again. This time, she was different. Less guarded, more real. She talked openly on camera about therapy, marriage, and the challenge of raising kids in the spotlight. Mauricio supported her, even joined her on screen occasionally, not as the perfect husband, but as a man learning to be better. Their daughter started writing poetry. Her school published one of her pieces in a newsletter. It was about strength, vulnerability, and the courage to feel everything without shame. Kyle cried when she read it. Mauricio framed it and put it in the hallway. Despite progress, not everything was healed. Some days were still hard. Some nights still ended in tears. But the difference now was that no one cried alone. They had learned that vulnerability was not weakness. It was the foundation of real connection. One evening, as they sat on the couch together, watching old home videos, Kyle leaned her head on Mauricio's shoulder. Their daughter, sitting on the floor, turned around and smiled. "You guys look like us again," she said. Kyle and Mauricio looked at each other and smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because they were still trying. And in a world that often demands perfection, the act of trying, together, was their quiet rebellion. The photo of them crying together eventually made its way online, leaked from a source close to the family. It went viral, not because of scandal, but because of its raw honesty. Fans responded with overwhelming empathy, many sharing their own stories of family struggles and emotional healing. Kyle chose not to comment on the photo. She didn't need to. The room was quiet except for the soft sound of breathing and occasional sniffles. Kyle Richards sat on the edge of the sofa, one hand clutching a tissue, the other gently resting on her lap. Her eyes were swollen, her cheeks damp, her lips trembling from trying not to sob. Beside her, her daughter was curled into herself, her body visibly shaking, while Mauricio sat across from them, elbows on his knees, face buried in his hands. No one had the strength to speak. Everything had already been said. This wasn't the first time tears had fallen in this house, but this time, they felt final. It wasn't a shouting match or an impulsive breakdown. It was a quiet collapse. A moment that had taken years to arrive, but was always inevitable. For so long, they had been holding things together, not because they were unbreakable, but because they were afraid of what might happen if they let go. Kyle glanced over at Mauricio, her eyes searching for the man she married, her best friend, her partner. The man who used to make her laugh in the middle of arguments, who once promised to never let her cry alone. But in recent months, it felt like they were speaking two different languages. Even when they were in the same room, there was a distance between them that no amount of touching or talking could close. Their daughter, the heart of their family, had watched it all unfold in silence, until today. She'd been trying to stay strong, pretending everything was okay. But the weight of it finally crushed her. She had walked into the living room, seen both her parents in the same space, and simply broke down. She cried not for what had already happened, but for what she feared was coming, the end of a family that once felt unshakable. Mauricio, who rarely showed emotion, looked up with tear-filled eyes and simply asked, "When did we stop being us?" The question hung in the air, painful and real. Kyle couldn't answer. Not because she didn't know, but because she knew exactly when it happened. It wasn't a single day or event. It was a slow erosion. Days filled with missed conversations, nights spent on opposite sides of the bed, smiles that didn't reach the eyes. They had both been so busy pretending everything was okay for their kids, their show, the public, that they forgot to check in with each other. Somewhere along the way, they became business partners, co-parents, public figures. Everything except the one thing they started out as: soulmates. Kyle wiped her face and finally spoke, her voice cracking. "I don't know how we got here." Mauricio nodded. "I do. We stopped making time for us. We stopped listening." Their daughter pulled herself together enough to whisper, "I just want my family back." That simple plea cut deeper than any argument could. Kyle moved beside her daughter, wrapped her arms around her, and kissed the top of her head. "I want that too, baby. More than anything." Mauricio sat forward. "I love both of you more than anything in this world. I never wanted to hurt you." Kyle nodded. "We never meant to get lost like this." And in that moment, all three of them sat there, no titles, no roles, just three human beings facing heartbreak together. Not blaming, not accusing, just feeling. Over the next few days, they started the hardest journey of all, rebuilding. Not the marriage, not the image, but the connection. They turned off their phones. They canceled public appearances. They made space for raw, unfiltered conversation. They sat together every morning at the kitchen table and talked about anything and everything. Sometimes they laughed, sometimes they cried, but they always stayed. No one walked away, no one shut down. Their daughter, still cautious, started opening up more. She shared how scared she'd been, how she'd stopped believing in happy endings. Kyle apologized, not just as a mother, but as a woman who had been trying to balance too much. Mauricio apologized too, not with grand gestures, but with quiet presence. He listened, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't try to fix anything. He just stayed. They brought in a family therapist. At first, it felt awkward. Vulnerability doesn't come easy when you're used to being on. But over time, it became a sacred space. A place to say the things they were too afraid to say elsewhere. Kyle admitted that she often felt invisible, that she missed being someone's priority. Mauricio admitted that he'd been scared of failing, not just in business, but in love. Their daughter said she didn't care if they were perfect, she just didn't want to be a casualty of silence. Little by little, they learned how to show up for each other again. One evening, Mauricio came home with an old photo album, pictures from when they first got married, holidays, vacations, goofy selfies. They spent hours looking through it, rediscovering a version of themselves that felt almost mythical. But it reminded them of what they'd once had, and that maybe it was still buried beneath the pain. They agreed to start dating again. Not in the literal sense, but emotionally. Every Friday, they planned an hour together. No parenting talk, no work, no shows, just them. Sometimes it was a walk. Sometimes it was a quiet meal. Sometimes they just sat together in silence. But those moments became sacred. Mauricio began writing letters to Kyle. Handwritten, heartfelt, vulnerable. Kyle responded with drawings, sketches of moments she didn't want to forget. Their daughter saw these exchanges and started writing letters too, telling each of them what she loved about them, what she needed from them, and what she hoped for their future. They started healing, not because they had all the answers, but because they chose to feel every question. Months passed. The public still speculated. Rumors flew, headlines buzzed, paparazzi followed. But they didn't explain. They didn't defend. They didn't perform. They just kept doing the work. One afternoon, Kyle found a note from Mauricio tucked inside her book. It read, "I miss the way your eyes lit up when you'd catch me staring. I promise to keep looking until they do again." She cried, but this time it wasn't from pain. It was from hope. That weekend, they went to the beach as a family. No cameras. Just them. They built a sandcastle together, something they hadn't done since their daughter was little. They laughed when the tide swept it away. Kyle whispered, "That's okay. We'll build another." And that became their motto. We'll build another. They weren't trying to go back. They weren't trying to erase the cracks. They were learning to embrace them, to let the light in. Their daughter started drawing again. Her latest piece was a portrait of their family, 3 people, holding hands, surrounded by waves. At the top she wrote, "We stayed." Kyle framed it and hung it in the entryway. Sometimes, late at night, Kyle and Mauricio sit on the porch with glasses of wine, watching the stars. They talk about nothing and everything. They still have rough days. They still disagree. But they always return to each other. They've learned that real love isn't perfect. It's persistent. The photo of them crying is still the most raw image of their lives. It captured the worst day and the beginning of a better chapter. It's a reminder that even when everything falls apart, something beautiful can grow from the pieces. They're not the same family they once were. They're stronger because they chose not to give up. And now, every time they pass that photo in the hallway, they don't see shame or sadness. They see love. Real, messy, imperfect love. Mauricio sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at his wedding band. The morning sunlight crept through the half-closed blinds, casting long shadows across the counter. He hadn't slept much. The fight last night had been different, colder, sharper, with words they both knew couldn't be taken back. Upstairs, Kyle was silent, and their daughter had locked her door. The weight in the house was unbearable. Down the hall, Kyle leaned against the bathroom sink, her eyes red from crying. Her reflection didn't feel like her. She touched her face like she was trying to recognize herself. The woman who once smiled so easily, laughed so loudly, now looked like she was holding everything inside to stop from falling apart. They'd been trying for months to keep it all together. For their family, for the cameras, for their reputation. But behind closed doors, things had unraveled. The connection that once came effortlessly now felt strained, like forcing puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit. Every conversation turned into miscommunication. Every moment of silence between them got longer. The worst part, neither of them wanted this. Mauricio got up and walked to their daughter's room. He knocked once. No answer. He sighed. "Sweetheart, it's Dad. I want you to know I love you. We both do." From the other side of the door came the quietest, most heartbreaking voice. "I just want us to stop pretending." That was the sentence that finally cracked the facade. Mauricio pressed his forehead to the door, tears welling up. "I know, baby. I'm sorry." Later that day, all 3 of them ended up in the living room, not by plan but by exhaustion. The silence was heavy, but it was their daughter who broke it. "Are you guys getting divorced?" Kyle's body tensed. Mauricio opened his mouth, then closed it again. Neither knew how to answer that. Kyle reached out and took her daughter's hand. "We're trying. That's all I can promise." Her daughter nodded, but her lip quivered. Trying doesn't feel like enough anymore. Mauricio moved closer, placing his hand on her back. "You deserve more. You deserve peace." And then the tears came. First from their daughter, then from Kyle. Then Mauricio. 3 people, tangled in pain and fear, yet bound by something deeper than all of it, love. It wasn't just about the marriage. It was about the family, the foundation they built their lives on. And in that moment, they all realized just how fragile it had become. The weeks that followed weren't a fairy tale. They didn't magically find clarity or solutions. But they did make one decision: to start over. They called a family therapist. Kyle hated the idea of being analyzed, but she showed up anyway. Mauricio hated talking about feelings, but he listened. Their daughter sat between them, sometimes silent, sometimes furious, always hopeful. In therapy, hard truths came out. Kyle admitted that she'd built walls. "I felt like I was doing it all alone, even when you were right next to me," she told Mauricio. Mauricio confessed, "I thought if I just worked harder, it would fix everything. But I see now I wasn't present." Their daughter cried as she spoke about the pressure of being the glue. "I felt like if I wasn't okay, you two would fall apart." Kyle pulled her into her arms and whispered, "You should never have had to carry that." Outside of therapy, they set new ground rules. Weekly check-ins. No phones during dinner. One night a week, just the two of them. No work, no kids, just reconnection. It wasn't easy. Sometimes, the old habits crept in. Kyle would get defensive. Mauricio would shut down. Their daughter would retreat. But they kept showing up. And that made all the difference. Kyle started journaling every night. Not for anyone else, just herself. She wrote about her fears, her hopes, the little moments that gave her strength, like Mauricio holding her hand during therapy or her daughter humming in the kitchen again. Mauricio started walking in the mornings, clearing his head before the chaos of the day. He began writing notes, one each day, to Kyle or their daughter. They were short, sometimes just a sentence, but they carried meaning. One day, Kyle opened her book and found a note from him. "I still believe in us." She folded it and kept it in her wallet. Their daughter began painting again. She covered her room in canvases of ocean waves, trees with broken branches, and a family of 3 sitting under a thunderstorm holding hands. She didn't explain any of them. She didn't need to. At night, they all started eating dinner together again. At first, it was awkward. Small talk. Silence. But eventually, stories returned. Jokes resurfaced. Laughter crept in, timid at first, then louder. One night, their daughter asked if they remembered their last vacation before everything got tense. Kyle smiled. "Hawaii." Mauricio nodded. "The hike where you slipped and blamed the mud, even though you were wearing Gucci sandals?" They all laughed genuinely. They decided to recreate that trip. Not as a patch, but as a memory in the making. No filming, no friends. Just them. They hiked again. Kyle wore real boots this time. Mauricio held her hand the whole way. Their daughter collected leaves and turned them into a collage. On the final night of the trip, they sat on the beach, watching the sunset. Kyle leaned into Mauricio, and he kissed her forehead. "I missed this," she whispered. He squeezed her hand. "We're still us. Just a different version." Back home, things weren't perfect. They still had moments. But they had a toolkit now. And most importantly, they had each other's commitment. Then came the image. A friend, visiting during a difficult weekend, had unknowingly snapped the photo. Kyle, Mauricio, and their daughter crying on the couch. He sent it privately to Kyle. She looked at it for a long time. At first, she hated it. The vulnerability. The exposure. Then she saw it differently. It wasn't a photo of failure. It was a photo of truth. Of trying. Of a family that didn't give up. She printed it and kept it on her nightstand. One day, maybe years from now, she'll show it to her grandkids. She'll say, "This is the moment we almost lost everything but didn't." She'll point to her tear-streaked face and say, "That's the moment I chose love over pride." She'll point to Mauricio's grief-stricken eyes and say, "That's the moment he let himself be vulnerable." She'll point to her daughter's hands clutching both of theirs and say, "That's the moment she saved us." And then she'll say, "That's what real family looks like." Now, when people ask how they made it through, Kyle doesn't offer advice. She just says, "We stayed." Even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. The strength didn't come from never falling. It came from learning how to rise, together.